crime writer Ann Rule described him as a sadistic sociopath. A member of his own defense team said he was the very definition of heartless evil. He's even rumored to have called himself the most cold-hearted SOB you'll ever meet. While all of these quotes paint the portrait of a man who's committed horrific crimes, some people couldn't believe that Ted Bundy was a criminal. They thought he looked too normal, too attractive to be the serial killer that the courts were trying to make him out to be. But make no mistake about it, Ted Bundy was arguably one of the most prolific serial killers that America has ever seen. The terror that he caused was finally put to a definite end on the electric chair. But how did Bundy end up there in the first place? Born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946, Ted's mother, Louise, was unwed at the time. Being a single mother was quite the scandal in the 40s, so Louise passed herself off as Ted's older sister, while her mother and father pretended to be Ted's parents. He wasn't told the truth about his mother for a big chunk of his childhood. Though the identity of his father was never confirmed, there are rumors that Bundy was the product of Louise's abusive father, Ted's grandfather, Samuel Cowell. However, there is no proof as to the legitimacy of this theory. In the 50s, Louise married Johnny Bundy, which is how Ted eventually got his last name. Although Johnny adopted Ted and tried to treat him as if he were one of his own, Ted remained distant. Prison psychologist Al Carlisle, who performed a psychological assessment of Bundy, doesn't believe that he was born a psychopath. Instead, Carlisle thinks that Bundy's loneliness and shyness as a child was what made him begin to fantasize about being an important and powerful person. That fantasy clearly got out of hand later on, but it started off small at first. He started to peep into people's windows as a teenager, watching people as they moved about in the privacy of their homes. He was drawn to detective magazines and was fascinated by the macabre, just like every other person out there who binge watches documentaries about serial killers. But Bundy was also addicted to explicit adult content, which he famously claimed was the fuel for the violent crimes he committed. While attending Washington University in Seattle, Ted met his first serious girlfriend, Diane Edwards, who also goes by the pseudonym Stephanie Brooks. He was studying for an undergraduate degree in Chinese when the relationship took off. According to Ted himself, the time that he shared with Diane had a lasting impact on him. She came from a well-to-do family, and Bundy wanted so desperately to fit in with the upper crust of society. Diane and Ted split up soon after, and Bundy believed that his lack of power and money is what ultimately caused her to break things off. This was a time in his life where psychologist Al Carlisle suggests he completely fell apart. The breakup was a big turning point in Carlisle's opinion, as he believes it's when the seeds of Bundy's psychopathic personality began to grow. Ironically enough, Bundy ended up getting a degree in psychology. He even attended 2 different law schools, but stopped going to class altogether around the same time that women began disappearing in both areas. Did his breakup with Diane turn him into a serial killer? Not directly, no. But the failure and rejection that he felt did leave him feeling more lost and lonely than ever. This, no doubt, led him to turn to fantasy as a sort of comfort. He fantasized about being powerful. When Bundy went after his victims, he felt very powerful. He wasn't a culmination of what he lacked in those situations. He was in total control. And who exactly were Ted Bundy's victims? Well, it's hard to know for sure when he started committing his tragic crimes. He told different stories to different people, and held back on pertinent information in some cases. Writer Stephen McCoud said that Bundy turned interviews into a game of chutes and ladders, with disingenuous pleas of false memory, and long silences preventing me from pinning him down. But we do know that his first known attack took place in January 1974. He broke into University of Washington student Karen Sparks' apartment while she was sleeping. She lived through the horrific event, but was in a coma for more than a week afterwards and suffered severe brain damage. A month later, Linda Ann Healy, another UW student, went missing from her apartment. This was the beginning of a vanishing spree among college-age women in the area. They went missing at a rate of 1 per month. Donna Gale Manson vanished in March while on her way to a concert on campus of Evergreen State College. Susan Elaine Raincourt disappeared while on her way back to her Central Washington State College dorm in April. After that, Bundy stopped going to his law classes and seemed to get bolder with his kidnappings. Roberta Kathleen Parks went missing in May after leaving her dorm at Oregon State University. Brenda Ball was abducted from the Flame Tavern in June while she was looking for a ride home. Just a few days later, UW student Georgianne Hawks was taken while walking back to her sorority house. Then in July, we're still in 1974 at this point, Bundy pulled off a double kidnapping in a single day. Janice Ott was seen leaving the Lake Sammamish State Park beach with an attractive young man and was never seen again. Denise Naslund disappeared without a trace after she went to use the washroom at that same beach just a few hours later. While all of these cases might not have seemed connected at first, all of the victims were young, attractive women, and the majority of them wore their hair long with a part down the middle. Interestingly enough, right before this string of disappearances, Ted and Diane, the girl who broke his heart a few years earlier, got back together briefly. The year was 1973, and Ted seemed to have all of the career ambition and maturity that Diane felt he'd previously lacked. Diane was completely taken by him this time around, and they'd even discussed marriage. But Ted had other plans in mind for this rekindling. He started acting cold and distant towards her, and then he stopped communicating with her altogether with no explanation. When confronted about his behavior, Ted maintained that he had no idea what she was talking about. But Diane believes that he got back together with her just so that he could break her heart in the same way that she had broken his. He later admitted that he wanted to prove to himself that he could have married her. Thankfully, Diane was able to escape Bundy's toxic clutches right before it all went downhill. While many true crime researchers theorize that Bundy sought out victims that looked like Diane, with their hair parted down the middle, they didn't all fit into that profile. Witness reports began to file in about an attractive young man seen hanging around different campuses in the area. When Susan Elaine Raincourt went missing from Central Washington State College, two women told investigators that they had been approached by a man asking if they could help carry his books to his car. It's important to note that the man was wearing an arm sling and drove a Volkswagen Beetle, which the women said was tan or brown. One of these witnesses was approached 3 nights before Raincourt's disappearance, while the other was approached on the same night. In Georgianne Hawkins' case, witnesses again came forward to say that they'd seen a man with a briefcase hanging around near the alley that she disappeared from. One woman was even approached by the man, who asked if she could help him carry his briefcase to his car. The man was struggling to walk due to a leg cast, and he also drove a light brown Volkswagen Beetle. When the two women both disappeared from the Lake Sammamish State Park beach without a trace, at least 5 women came forward with the same story about being approached by an attractive young man named Ted. The man had his arm up in a sling and had asked each of them for help unloading his sailboat from his bronze-colored or tan Volkswagen Beetle. 4 of the women said no, and the one who agreed immediately ran away when she noticed there was no sailboat in his car. 3 more witnesses claimed that Janice Oat, who was seen walking away from the beach with an attractive young man, had agreed to help him out. A pattern was beginning to form. Women in Washington, especially in college, were in a state of constant fear. The police posted a composite sketch of their suspect and his car, hoping to bring in more civilian tips. At this point, Ted moved to Salt Lake City to attend the University of Utah Law School. A month after he arrived, another kidnapping spree began. Nancy Wilcox disappeared in October of 1974 from a suburb of Salt Lake City. She was reportedly last seen in a Volkswagen Beetle. Melissa Smith, the daughter of a police chief, went missing in October that same year. A few weeks later, Laura Ann Amy vanished after leaving a party. In November, Carol DeRoche contacted the police after she managed to escape from Bundy's car. She was approached by him at the mall about someone attempting to break into her car. Posing as a police officer, Bundy won her trust over and convinced her to go with him to the police station to file a complaint. When Carol pointed out that he wasn't driving to the police station, Bundy pulled over and a struggle ensued. Carol was luckily able to escape. That same night, Deborah Kent disappeared after leaving the theater at Viewmont High School. A teacher and student both told the police that they had been approached by a man in the parking lot. While the police received over 200 calls a day in regards to their composite sketches, It was information provided by two people that proved integral: Elizabeth Klepfer and Ann Rule. Elizabeth was Bundy's longtime girlfriend, and the two had almost even gotten married. She grew suspicious after seeing the composite sketches, but was hesitant to go to the police at first. She finally called them to voice her concern about Ted. She would go on to report Bundy to the police multiple times. Ann Rule was a true crime writer who'd worked alongside Ted at a suicide hotline. She didn't know if Bundy owned a car, but alerted the police to him anyway because he matched the description of the suspect. For some reason, cops didn't take Elizabeth and Ann's tips too seriously, which allowed Bundy to continue on his sadistic spree. They didn't seem to think that a law student with no previous crime record could be responsible for such grisly acts. By 1975, young women in Colorado and Idaho also began to vanish at an alarming rate. Bundy was now committing his crimes in multiple states. Karen Campbell went missing while walking from the elevator to her room at the Wildwood Inn in January. 2 months later, Julie Cunningham disappeared near her Colorado apartment. In April, Denise Lynn Oliverson was kidnapped while riding her bike to her parents' house. A month later, Lynette Culver was abducted from Idaho's Alameda Junior High School. Then, Susan Curtis went missing from Utah's Brigham Young University at the end of June. Investigators began to take the claims about Bundy more seriously, after his name was part of a group of names that showed up on 4 separate computer-generated lists, made from all the crime data they had. Luckily, Bundy had been stopped before they even had a chance to investigate him further. A Utah Highway Patrol officer had pulled him over in August 1975 after he'd been driving slowly through a residential area at an odd hour. The officer found a ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, and other suspicious items in the car. Although he matched the description of the suspect and car used in the attempted abduction of Carol DaRonch, they had to release him due to a lack of evidence. They placed Bundy on 24-hour surveillance and paid a visit to Elizabeth Klepfer. Elizabeth admitted that she found a bag of women's underwear in his apartment and a bowl filled with house keys. He also kept a knife in his car and plaster and bandage wraps in his apartment. She confessed that Bundy had confided in her that sometimes he followed people at night. He even once specifically mentioned a sorority girl. She also confirmed that he wasn't with her on any of the nights that women in Washington vanished. Bundy's Volkswagen, which he'd sold to a teenager, was impounded, and a hair sample that could be linked to Karen Campbell was found inside. In October of 1975, Carol DaRonch identified Bundy in a lineup as the man who tried to kidnap her. Witnesses also identified him as the man lurking around the high school parking lot on the day that Deborah Kent went missing. Though they couldn't immediately link him to Kent, he was charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault in the DaRonch case, but he was freed soon after his parents paid his $15,000 bail. In March of 1976, Bundy was found guilty of his charges in the DaRonch case and was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. While in prison, he was charged with the murder of Karen Campbell, which had him transferred to a jail in Aspen, Colorado to stand trial. Bundy attempted to escape jail multiple times, and he actually succeeded twice. The first time, he managed to spend just a few days on the run, but the second time he escaped, in December of 1977, he was able to travel all the way to Florida. And on January 15, 1978, Bundy snuck into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University to perform yet another one of his gruesome acts. He fatally attacked 2 sorority sisters and left 2 others seriously injured. This sorority house attack lasted less than 15 minutes. He then broke into the apartment of FSU student Cheryl Thompson, where he left her battered and partially deaf. A few weeks later, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from Lake City, Florida. It's important to note that of all the women we've mentioned thus far, only 5 survived Bundy's attempts on their lives. On February 15th, Bundy was stopped for driving a stolen vehicle, a Volkswagen Beetle. Inside the car were IDs belonging to several FSU students and dozens of stolen credit cards. In June 1979, Bundy stood trial for his crimes at the Chi Omega house. He was found guilty. A few months later, he stood trial for his crimes involving Kimberly Leach. he was found guilty and was given the death penalty. He actually received 3 death sentences during these 2 trials. After his appeals were exhausted and his time began to run out, Ted started to confess to his crimes. In all, he claimed responsibility for ending the lives of more than 30 women in 7 states between 1974 and 1978, though authorities believe that number to be much higher, maybe even in the triple digits. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was finally executed by electric chair. Many people wore shirts that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn," and fireworks were even set off in celebration. After hearing about the long list of crimes he committed, this type of reaction was warranted, but who knew that there'd be a whole gaggle of fans rooting for him to be taken off death row? Bundy was attractive, well-spoken, charismatic, a law student, and he knew how to dress well. A young woman once told a reporter outside the courtroom that he just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody. He used this same charisma to lower the defenses of his victims and to win over their trust. Margaret Good, one of his early defense lawyers, used to receive handwritten notes on her way into the courtroom from his fans. He even received letters while he was on death row. Journalist Stephen McCoud also revealed that women would show up to court with their hair purposely parted down the middle to look like his victims. We'll never understand why some people were attracted to a man who committed crimes that were so heinous. We'll never even truly understand why Ted Bundy committed these crimes in the first place. Nicknamed the Lady Killer, Ted actually admitted that he got along better with women than he did with men. In his own words, "It wasn't that I disliked women or was afraid of them. It was just that I didn't seem to have an inkling as to what to do about them. I honestly can't say why." But in contradiction to that statement, he reportedly also told authorities, "Women are possessions, women are merchandise." His defense lawyer, Polly Nelson, maintained that he heard voices that told him to hurt women, which she argued was a symptom of an undiagnosed manic depressive disorder. During a psychological assessment, Bundy admitted that he didn't commit some aspects of his crimes because he enjoyed the excitement of it. He did unspeakable things because he liked being in possession of the person. He felt like he owned the essence of his victims. Like we mentioned earlier, he also felt that his motivation to commit violence was fueled by his addiction to adult content. While many speculate that Bundy's upbringing must have been rough, Bundy maintained that he had a normal childhood, though some believe that he may have started his kidnappings at as young as 14. Perhaps the most horrific part about the whole Ted Bundy ordeal is the fact that he felt no guilt or remorse over his crimes. In fact, he said that he was in an enviable position to not feel any guilt at all. He took away the lives of so many bright young women, leaving holes in the heart of their families forever. There are many missing women and homicide cases out there that have yet to be linked to Ted Bundy, and who knows if they ever will be. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this notorious serial killer in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe